Today we continue sampling the House of Zoologist. Will I be just as surprised as last time? Hello, welcome back to Seldomly Often. I'm Daniel. Today we're talking fragrances, and this is Fragrance Speed Dating with Zoologist Part 2. Welcome back to the second episode of Fragrance Speed Dating. Today we are continuing the sampling of the House of Zoologist. If you watched the first episode of the new speed dating format on my channel, you know that in the last video I started tackling the House of Zoologist. I started out with a massive sample size of 19, and I ended up sampling 10 of those 19 fragrances. Today we're left with those latter 9. Just to recap, in the first video I sampled the first 10, I sprayed them directly on strip, and I gave them a score from 1 to 10. I also mentioned in my last video that unfortunately some of the remaining samples, some of these remaining 9, I have smelt. I even know that for 1 or 2 I have a bottle, maybe I even reviewed 1 or 2. So I'll try to keep my opinion as unbiased as possible. I'll try to approach this almost in third person. I will completely disregard all my experience and give you exactly what I smell right away. Just to recap what this format is, this is meant to be a very quick and dirty first impression speed dating style of a house or a genre of fragrances. I have a lot more stuff lined up for this type of format. I have discovery sets from interesting houses. This format was conceived for 2 reasons. One, it allows me to go through samples at a very efficient rate and to start chipping away at the mountain of samples that I have. Second of all, it gives you guys and girls a little bit more of a speedy approach, maybe a little bit more faster paced type video compared to my usual long length, detail oriented reviews. One thing I really want to underline is that it's not like I'm going to this more fast paced format forever. This will be just a side gig, something to spice things up and to give you a little bit of variety. And these are just different levels of engagement with fragrances. On one side, again, we have those very detail-oriented reviews where I have 1 bottle and I go all in on that with multiple wears. On the other side, we have this, which is basically very much speed dating style, very first impressions. I spend about 2 to 4 minutes on each fragrance. Just for context, and specifically because this is part 2 of Zoologist, I really recommend you go back to part 1, watch that first. You'll get a better idea of what I'm doing, my style of approach, my expectations for the fragrances, how I receive those fragrances, and it will give you a little bit more of a sense of comparison of what I'm doing, specifically for these last 9 fragrances here. As mentioned, in this video format, I'll be spraying these fragrances on strip. Usually I spray on skin, so I have a very much biased, personalized experience. And I decided to spray on strip for this video format. Number 1, because I simply don't have space for 9 fragrances on skin. It would get very confusing very fast. Also, I really wanted to keep this unbiased. I really wanted to exclude any kind of skin chemistry, specifically because it is a first impression. And I really don't want to introduce any sort of like outside bias. Super quickly on the House of Zoologist, if you haven't watched the last video, Zoologist is a brand that focuses on fragrance inspired by animals, animal habitats. It's very creative, very fun. There's a lot of irony in these scents. These humanoid animals have a lot of personality. Sometimes it's about an idea. Like in the case of rabbit, I found that the fragrance really smelled like carrot cake. Doesn't really represent the animal or the environment, but it still kind of recalls rabbits. In other cases, it might be more about the environment. For example, in the case of penguin. Overall, I really appreciate the house. I really appreciate the experimental facet. It's fun, it's a breath of fresh air, and the house really speaks to me. So much so that I actually own 6 bottles of Zoologist. I have reviewed 2 already on my channel, and who knows, maybe I plan on getting more. All right, I say we start the thing off. First fragrance from the batch is Macaque Fuji Apple Edition. I have not smelled this, I have 0 experience with this scent, and I have 0 expectations of what this scent is like. And this is due to the fact that Macaque Fuji Apple and even the Yuzu edition really never spoke to me as a scent. I've never really researched them and I never really sampled them, so I have 0 knowledge of what these could be. I'm guessing these would possibly be some sort of an easy to wear fruit, but I guess there's only one way to find out. Okay, let's start. 2 sprays on the strip here. Okay, this is quite unusual here. I'm kind of being caught off guard. This smells very designerish, very approachable. And I say designerish because in the back of this fragrance, the base, the body of it, smells like some sort of woody amber boosting like compound. It smells kind of like empty volume. And this is the way I described a lot of the designers that I sampled in my first impression comparison, namely Versace Purhomme. I think it was also Dolce & Gabbana The One. And yeah, it has the same sort of backbone here. In the top, I get fruits. I do get the apple. Again, I might be biased by the name of the fragrance, but it's there. And it's surprising because I really wasn't expecting Zoologists to come up with something like this. And even the more approachable scents from Zoologists always have some sort of a character to them. And this one here, it's not that it doesn't have character, but it's very, very mass appealing. This might be probably the most mass appealing fragrance from Zoologist that I smelled to date. And dare I say it, it kind of smells like a little bit more of a refined, simple and elegant version of Versace Eros EDP. Yeah, I said it. That's kind of the first thing that came to mind. I really had to metabolize it for a sec, but it's pretty much that. Very, very designerish, very mass appealing, very modern, very fresh. Totally not my thing. I would never buy a full bottle of this, specifically because Zoologist is not an inexpensive brand, and you really have to be committed to the brand in order to appreciate something like this when there's so much other stuff on the market for so much cheaper, and arguably, if you're into this kind of thing, even more appealing because it has a brand name behind it. Overall score, this is gonna start rough. This is a 6 out of 10 at most. Okay, second scent is actually Makak Yuzu edition. So we're going back to back with monkeys. Given my experience with the apple one, I think that this one here came afterwards. I'm not expecting much. Unfortunately, it's the same kind of animal. I would expect that the same kind of DNA and backbone is there. I'm not sure if they're perfumed by the same perfumer. There might be something written around somewhere in here, but yeah, I'm not gonna bother. This is first impressions, this is speed dating. I'll just be straightforward. And by the way, I know it's obvious, but these are official Zoologist samples. I always do recommend sampling with official samples, just because they are factory sealed. You have a much better understanding of what the scent is like. Decant world works well enough, but you really never know what you're getting. You have to be basically trusting that you're getting what you're buying. And also if the decant itself is old or not properly sealed, the fragrance could have been oxidized or could have gone bad, giving you, again, false impressions. Another cool thing about the Zoologist samples is that you get a ton of information about the fragrance. You get the notes, you get a lot of text, the story. I would love to read this for you, but honestly, we don't have time. This format is not about this. This format is about first impressions, quick and dirty. Once again, I have zero experience with Makak Yuzu edition. Let's give it a couple sprays. Yup, the backbone is pretty much the same kind of designer DNA. The top of the fragrance is much lighter than the other one. It might be due to the type of fruit. Yuzu is, I seem to recall that yuzu is some sort of a citrus. This has a little bit more of a citrusy opening. The other one was more directly apple. It was a lot sweeter, it was a lot more present. This is very delicate. The whole scent profile is very delicate. Between the base, which is, again, that kind of like empty volume type of smell, that boosting compound type of smell, and the very faint top notes of yuzu, this thing is barely noticeable. And honestly, this might be the worst Zoologist fragrance I've smelt to date. And again, worst is really in relative terms. And I have zero concept of the dry down. I'm not really interested in that in this format. I don't know the longevity. I don't know anything about the scent. But based on the opening and based on the price of Zoologist fragrances, I think that you could do a lot better with the brand. Yep, unimpressed, very bland, very boring. I would say this is 5 out of 10. Okay, so this fragrance is the first one that I have a ton of experience with because I actually own a bottle of TRex. I'm in love with this fragrance. I think it's a wonderful fragrance. It opens very strong. It has a wonderful transition from the opening to the dry down, but I'll try to keep it as unbiased as possible, see what comes off the strip, because to be honest, I never really wore TRex, my bottle, on strip, so this might be new. Let's just dive into it and see what happens. Liquid color for this one is dark, and I can confirm the bottle too is very dark. Let's air it out a little bit. So, let me just say something first. TRex is known to be one of the strongest fragrances from Zoologist. It's known to be one of the strongest fragrances basically out there in general. It's very, very long lasting, very in your face, very aggressive. And let me get into third person mode here. The first thing you pick up is smoke. There is a lot of smoke. There is burnt wood. The type of smokiness that you get in here, the type of woods, it's a bitter type of smell. There is definitely some greenery in here. It almost smells like you're preparing a barbecue for something. It has this weird sort of like charred aspect to it. And I don't know why, but when I smell this scent, and again, I'm trying really to put myself in third person mode here, I think about the color brown. It's a very deep brown that's almost like smoldering. And yeah, this is definitely intense. It's not stinky, or rather, it's not your traditional stinky thing because there's no real animalic in the opening. There's no funky barnyardy oud in here. It's just very in your face, very direct, very burnt. There's some sort of a saltiness to it that kind of reminds me of like olive brine or like some sort of a brine. Just very, very salty, very burnt, very aggressive. This scent is definitely something else, let me tell you. This is the only fragrance from all the ones that I sampled in the series, from the last video and obviously from this one here. It's the only one that is harsh. It's the only one that is very, very aggressive and that I would deem not very wearable to the general public. Yeah, this is definitely not for everyone, but if you want something intense, if you are a fan of like burnt smell, if you're a fan of maybe like smoke, like bitter smoke, this could be right up your alley. Yeah, I can't speak for the dry down. I know what it is, but I can't speak about it. But very interesting. Nonetheless, very, very interesting. And this is one of those scents that comes across, even initially, as complicated. This is one of those scents, very in contrast with the macaque thing, that feels like it has a lot more to give. If I haven't already smelled this, if I wouldn't be owning a bottle of this, this would definitely be one that I would want to sample at the very least in a first impression comparison video, because I really would want to give it the chance to develop and to see what's in the bottom of this. Overall score on the opening alone, I would have to say it's, honestly, it's a 7. As much as I love the scent, a lot of it has to do with the development, but in an unbiased opinion, opening alone is a 7. Disappointingly enough, here we have another fragrance that I have a ton of experience with. I own the bottle. I even have a full review of this on my channel. But again, I'll put on my third person hat. I'll just spray it on the strip and give you my very first impressions. And I'll give you a score based on those first impressions. And if you're thinking that this exercise is kind of useless because I'm sort of faking it in a way, I would have to say that I'm not necessarily faking it, because I'm really trying to give my first impressions only, and I'm gonna completely disregard any information that I have about this thing for the dry down, for the longevity, and for the use cases. You can take this however you want, but my thought process in this is that whoever is watching this video might not have watched my full review and might not be even interested in watching my full review. This is a completely different approach. Okay, 2 sprays. Okay, initially off the bat, very, very sweet. Once again, I have not smelled this ever on strip, just because I never really use strips. Very sweet, very ambery, very warm. This has definitely a Middle Eastern type of vibe. I smell a lot of fruit, and this is a stark contrast with the wear on skin. But on strip, let me tell you, it's light, it's powdery, fruity, very approachable. There's nothing smelly about this. There's nothing really animalic about this in the opening. It's really nice, actually. On the strip, it comes across as very wearable, not necessarily mass appealing just because of the Middle Eastern nature of this thing, but very non-offensive. It's actually quite light on the strip. I think that the scent profile is modern in a way. I have a lot of ambers. I have a lot of experience with ambers, and none of them gives me this sort of impression. Probably the only amber fragrance that kind of resembles this is Desert Suave by Liquide Imaginaire. And I will eventually review that, but it sort of has the same type of vibe. And actually, I think that Desert Suave also has like a date accord. So the fruitiness in here comes across as very dry, like dry fruit. Yeah, it's good. There's almost like some sort of a like red winey type of feeling. There's maybe a little bit of a booze. It's good. I like it. I would say that the score for the first impressions of this, again, third person mode here, this would be definitely an 8. If I were to smell this in a shop, if I were to smell this off a sample, this would definitely stop me in my tracks and get me wanting more. Okay, I guess my fear was founded. This is another fragrance that I have a ton of experience with because I own a bottle of it. Bee is a wonderful fragrance, very, very, very complex. But once again, let's try to be unbiased as possible. Go in third person mode. I'll talk about the very first experience, very first impressions. I have never smelled this on strip, and this is for the people who want to know the quick and dirty about the scent. I really hope you understand my point of view, that you really don't perceive this as a fake enacting of something. This is just a different type of format. And yeah, I'm not gonna obviously fake my first impressions. I know what it smells like, but I have never smelled it on a strip. And yeah, I'll try to be straightforward as possible. Okay, so first of all, I love this scent. As I said, it's very, very complex, and it smells complex off the strip. First impression, very, very strong, very rich. The first thing that hits your nose is honey. There's a ton of honey in here. Even off the strip, honey is the main thing. It's very photorealistic. It has so much depth, it has so much density. This feels like a separate tier of zoologists, in my opinion. Especially compared to like Macaque, especially compared to other stuff, even to TRex, honestly. This smells like so much more higher quality. It smells completely different. There's some from the other batch that I smelled that had this sort of impression. One of them was hummingbird. It smells so high quality, so well done. And this one here has that kind of feeling. It's rich, it's dense, it's heavy. It's honestly beautiful. Yeah, so you have to like honey to enjoy this. You have to be intrigued by the honey note. There's no animalics in the opening, nothing else. There's honey and there's florals. The florals have a back seat compared to the honey, but they're definitely there. Once again, I'm terrible with notes. I don't know what flowers these are. They just come across as very lush flowers, like very big in rendition. And maybe just because I'm imagining kind of like the point of view of the bee, but if you go into like a massive flower, this is the kind of smell that I would expect from there. Like the massive pollen grains or stuff like that. It's just really intense. It's a very intense smell. Even from the strip, this is incredibly 3D. This is incredibly deep. It's deep and dense. This is beautiful. To me specifically, the opening of this is like an 8.5 out of 10. It's definitely the best of the bunch that I smelled till now. Absolutely great. Well worth sampling. This would definitely stop me on my tracks. This would definitely hype me up like no other. Finally, one that I have never smelled, once again, Dodo Jackfruit Edition. So Dodo, the original Dodo, is known to be one of the more stinky smells out there. I have to confess, I have actually a bottle of the original Dodo. And it's not that bad, it's not that stinky. It's characterized basically by kind of like a green oily opening, kind of like a rosemary opening with a massive amount of musk in the background. It's a weird scent for sure. And as far as I know, the Dodo Jackfruit smells nothing like the original. Even when looking at the reviews online on Fragrantic and Perfumo, the two have a completely different score. People seem to like Dodo Jackfruit, people seem to hate the original. I have no idea what this smells like. I would think that it would smell some sort of like a tropical kind of thing. Dodo is an extinct animal. I know nothing about the animal. And honestly, I really haven't researched this fragrance much to know what to expect. Very excited, Dodo Jackfruit Edition. I don't even know what a jackfruit smells like. I don't even know what it looks like. What does a jackfruit smell like? I've never even seen one. Okay, interesting. Very fruity, very strong, first of all. Very fruity, very zingy. The fruit note is in your face, let me tell you, it's very strong. What even is a jackfruit? This smells kind of citrusy. It smells very fresh. It has like it has a very rindy type of smell, almost like acidic, almost like oily acidic. But at the same time, it has like almost like a cantaloupe, like a white melon kind of sweetness. It's very watery. Really intriguing, this one here, because compared to like the macaque, compared to other fruity scents, this is kind of unique. It's maybe due to that watery note in here that really kind of like brings me to like a cantaloupe or like a melon. But it's not very sweet. There's very little sweetness in here. It's mostly like that oily tartness mixed with this very fresh type of mouth-watering kind of melon aspect. And for all I know, I might just be describing a jackfruit perfectly. I have no idea what that tastes like. Isn't a jackfruit sort of like a cousin to the durian fruit in a way? And the durian is supposed to smell like, well, smell horrible for one, but it's supposed to taste very, isn't it supposed to taste kind of creamy, very dense and rich? This is definitely fresh. This is very, very fresh. It's so fresh that it's almost taking up a little bit of the macaque thing, that it almost smells like a blue fragrance in a way. In the bottom, I start getting something that is possibly resembling some sort of an animalic note, but it's not bad. It's more like a very, very light ambergris accord, like a very slight marine note, maybe some very slight muskiness. But I would say this is still pretty much totally wearable. It's still a little bit more interesting than your typical designer, definitely. It's way more interesting than macaque. I like it, it's not bad. I would be intrigued. I would be intrigued to give this a full wear to see where this is going. The opening is very fresh. This is definitely something for the summer, for the spring. It's good. I think it's cool. I like the art. I have no idea, once again, what jackfruit smells like. I have no idea what the dodo environment is, what the dodo animal is all about. I mean, it's a bird, but other than that, I have no idea. So I think that this is supposed to be some sort of a recreation, maybe of an extinct environment, but it's very jungly, very fresh, but there's not much herbaceousness in here. It's just fruit. Very approachable. I like it. I would say it's a 7.5 out of 10. I like it a lot. Okay, we're back at something that I have a lot of experience with. I have a review up for this. I had a bottle, traded it off because there was a little bit of redundancy with another fragrance that I have. But nonetheless, third person mode, once again, this is a very popular fragrance from the house. Very, very interesting. The art style is what first intrigued me to Squid. And my expectations for the scent were something along the lines of the dry down of a imaginative, very dark, very marine, very, very kind of like sea monster-like. But this was a little bit different. Once again, I've never smelled this on strip, so I have no idea about the rendition of that. I never sprayed it on clothes or anything like that. I'm going to be unbiased as possible. I'm going to give you the first impressions. I'm going to only talk about the opening of this. Okay, so I haven't smelled this in a while actually, because I haven't had the bottle for at least a month and a half or 2 months. And I'm actually really surprised. Maybe because, again, on strip it renders completely different than on skin. And I know I said I would be unbiased, and I know I said that I would give my very first impressions only, but I want to point something out because I think it's important. In my review for Squid, I mentioned that worn on skin, Squid doesn't really show much of a marine type note in there, and it's mostly about incense. And on strip, going back to third person mode, on strip, there's a ton of marine in here. It's beautiful, actually. I wish this would smell like this on skin. Very fresh, very incensey, very inky, but the first thing that comes to mind is definitely the marine. It's a different type of marine note because there's not your typical kind of like salty cologne feel. It's not stinky in any way. It definitely feels It definitely feels like you're like underwater for some reason. And the inkiness is very much present on strip. It's incredible how much a fragrance can change between skin and strip. I really like it a lot more on strip. It's so much more unique. It's so much more intricate. I can really pick out more things on it. And the fragrance is really beautiful because it really perfectly balances the inkiness. There's a very strong kind of like sweet ink accord. And I know ink is not necessarily supposed to be sweet, but it almost comes across as, I don't know, there's something so smooth about the ink smell paired with the marine thing. It's just so relaxing. It's almost like when you go underwater, and I find this particularly relaxing. When you go underwater, like sitting at the bottom of a pool, which I used to do all the time when swimming, and you hear the sounds outside, very, very muffled. It's not necessarily a quiet environment, especially if you're not that deep underwater, but there's something really serene about it. It's almost like you're in a cocoon. It's very, very calming to me. And this scent perfectly represents sitting at the bottom of a pool. You still hear what's about, you still hear the water splashing on the top, but it's so comforting. The incense note is very, very smooth, very sweet. It's beautiful, my God. I really like this. This on strip, first impressions, very, very high up there, and I can totally see how Squid is one of the more popular fragrances from the house. Absolutely amazing, absolutely amazing. Highly recommend you get your nose on Squid because it's totally worth the hype. It's such a unique smell. This is a strong 8.5 out of 10. It's dense, it's strong, but it's still delicate at the same time, very elegant. It's so well balanced, so well crafted. Yeah, strong 8.5 out of 10. Beautiful, absolutely gorgeous. Okay, 2 samples left. One of them I own a bottle of. And let's get that out of the way right away. The other one, I'm very, very intrigued. The one I own a bottle of is Seahorse. I don't have much experience with this because I bought this recently. I bought this at the tail end of summer. I didn't really get many wears in. I probably got 1 full wear, but it was a very distracted wear. I was out and about in Rome. It was very hot, very loud. I didn't really get my full frag experience. And since I came back, I never wore it just because the season changed so dramatically and so drastically that, I don't know, I just sort of like shelved it. I am very intrigued by the scent, but at the very least, I don't have a lot to say of it. The review will be coming, but I have to get many more wears, many more full wears to really understand what's going on. One of the reasons why I purchased Seahorse and why I find this intriguing is that, well, I like the art, I like the concept. This should be a marine scent, but it's very delicate. It should be very much for like the shallow reef type of thing. I really like Giulietta Skinet and I trust his expertise. Again, I don't even remember what this smells like, really. I kind of just remember some sort of herbaceousness, and I never wore it on strip, so this is pretty much new. Okay, so interesting, because this scent, compared to Squid, doesn't really smell like a marine scent. It doesn't, it definitely has some saltiness, but if I were to smell this completely blind, without knowing that it's a Seahorse, without knowing that it's a zoologist, I don't think I would even point to a marine scent. This is very green. It's very green, very herbaceous. The greenery in here has a sweet tone to it. It almost has like a culinary tendency to it. It has a kind of note that reminds me of anise, almost like a licoricey green, but it's a fresh, watery green. It feels like it's wet. It feels like some sort of a leafy green that is almost dewy, maybe like in the morning when it rained on. Barely any kind of like saltiness. There's a watery aspect, but I definitely associate it more with the greenery rather than with like a separate pool of water. I really have to take into account that I know that it's Seahorse. Obviously, if you were to smell this, you would know that it's Seahorse. So in that context, I would say that this represents maybe it's an abstract representation of like the shallow waters of a coral reef again. And I'm trying to imagine the habitat of a seahorse. I'm trying to think about it, and the first thing that comes to mind for whatever reason is something like Finding Nemo. Very colorful, very bright, very fresh, very summery. And the scent sort of reflects that. It's kind of like surprisingly unsurprising, and I used this term before, but it's, I have to say that there's a boring aspect to this. I'm really reaching here. The opening again is, it might be intriguing, but it's not mass appealing. It's a weird combination because it kind of smells like a designer, but it kind of smells like a weird designer. It's that kind of scent profile which you would pick up and be very confused about. Because on one side, niche head part of you would be like, oh, this is interesting. Nice greenery, nice watery greens. But on the other side, you would be, but why does it smell like a designer? And coming from the designer point of view, you'd be, oh, it kind of like smells like a blue fragrance, but what's that in the top? It smells so weird and so foreign. So this is a very strange middle ground. And I knew this before buying the bottle, by the way. I'm kind of like zoning out a sec. I knew that it would be this sort of like strange combination of like wearable, but not. And in my one time of wearing this, I really don't remember anything like this because, again, this is off strip. It's completely different. The dewy freshness does not translate well to skin for sure. But if you were to wear this on a t-shirt or on a shirt or on clothing in general, I feel that this would be a very unique summer scent. I would say that if I were to smell this completely blind, I would give this like a 7 out of 10. Intriguing, but not necessarily my thing. Last, but very much not least, and this might be a theme, this might be the happy ending of both of these series, because the first one, I smelled rabbit, which was my overwhelmingly most appreciated scent, and Civet. This is a scent that I'm very, very excited about. I have not smelled this. I heard great things about it. One thing that I've heard about it is that this is, despite the animal represented, it's not very animalic, not very skanky. And Civet is usually one of the major animalic notes that you find in most other perfumes. It's very pissy. It smells kind of like a hamster cage. It smells kind of like a ferret. Well, that's what it is actually. It's kind of like a ferret. But this is supposed to be very much Middle Eastern, very spicy, very warm, and I'm really curious. Oh, this is interesting. This is really unexpected. There's a very strong Coca-Cola accord. It really reminds me of the opening of Roja Enigma. Wow, this is completely unexpected. I thought I would get like warm spices, like cinnamon, maybe like an amber type thing. But this is really unexpected. It smells like the opening of Roja. I swear it smells just like it. This smells like Roja Enigma. It has the same type of very beautifully balanced bougie note with the cola accord that's not too sweet, very adult. There's definitely some cinnamon in there. There's some other thing that really helps this cola accord. Maybe it's like nutmeg. But yeah, I can't get away from this cola accord, and to be honest, I can't smell anything else than that in the strip here. It's beautiful. I really like this. This is super intriguing. I think that this fragrance smells heavy, it smells dense. Similar to Bee, it smells complicated. It smells like it has a lot going on. It smells like it has a lot to give and to show. And this smells like one of those fragrances where the dry down would be completely different from the opening. This is like a really good combination between Roja Enigma and Casamorati 1888 by Zerjov. And by the way, that one too has, to me at least, a very much a kind of a spicy root beer type of thing going on. And now that cola is sort of fading, and it's been very, very little, you start picking out on some ambers, some animalics maybe. There is a slightly animalic tendency to this. I'm not really sure if it's civet or if it's some sort of a floral in there that is contrasting with the sweet top notes. But it's kind of slowly leaning towards The first thing that comes to mind is something like Goldman, but very, very slight, very light version of Goldman. I have to say it's a beautiful scent. This leans heavily perfumey compared to a lot of other zoologists, which are ironic experimental takes. Even stuff like bee, stuff like rabbit, stuff like other things that I smelled, even TRex, they're all very experimental. They all bring you on this journey. This comes across as a perfume. It's not a bad take, but there's really not much civet in here, like the animal, like the character. This is a little bit detached. That's the only negative thing that I have about this. But the fragrance itself is massively beautiful. I really like it. This too is definitely a fragrance that has a lot to give in terms of development, in terms of complexity. And I would really want to smell this in a first impression comparison. Actually, I think I had this lined up in a first impression comparison. Unfortunately, I will not be going into that completely blind, but I don't have full wear, and this is just the first opening, so there's that. I would say opening wise, if you're more into the perfumey type of aspect, this is very, very good. It's a solid 8. Definitely not my favorite, just because it lacks a little bit of character. I think that my favorite till now was Bee with the 8.5. That's absolutely beautiful. It's mesmerizingly deep. This one here, it's good, but it's a little bit too perfumey. If I didn't know it was a zoologist, I would have never guessed or known anything like that. Yeah, Civet, great take, great way to end the series. Zoologist sampling, a lot of fun, despite this second episode being filled with a ton of fragrances that I have a lot of experience with. I really hope that you got what you needed to get. I really hope that you understood my take, and I really tried my best to be as unbiased as possible. Not everyone that is watching this will be watching my full reviews, so I'm hoping that this is useful to someone that is just approaching the house and that wants to get a general feel of what the house is like. This is definitely a fun yet very exhausting format to film. My nose is fatigued by smelling all this stuff. My brain is fatigued by trying to sort of like piece them out, trying to pick them apart, and trying to come up with something to tell you. It's a really good exercise because it really makes me understand what these fragrances are, and even putting myself in third person, although I'm quite analytical and objective most of the times, this really forces me to take a step back and put myself into the shoes of someone who is smelling the sample for the first time, possibly has no idea about zoologists, no idea about the brand in general, and it's fun, it's interesting, yet it's very fatiguing. But nonetheless, I'll be doing a lot more of these. I like this segment. It's a quick way, again, to get through samples. I have much more abstract houses lined up, so I'll definitely be smelling less fragrances in each episode because I'll probably be taking a lot more time for each fragrance. And by the nature of the house, these are based on animals, so even by imagery alone, there is something that you can grasp to, there's something that you can like cling to sort of help yourself piece this out. In other cases, it might be way more difficult, specifically for the next house I'll be covering on this channel. If you have any comments, suggestions, or opinion on this format, if you have anything to say about it, please feel free to leave a comment down below. I always reply and I always keep the conversation open. If you want to talk about zoologists, if you want to talk about your impressions on the house, again, comment down below. I love talking to you guys. For now, it's all. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for your time. Many more fragrances to come, reviews, first impressions, this new format. I even have another format in mind that I've been developing for a long time. It's called Fragrance Opinions, but I don't want to give anything away. We'll see what happens. I really like this channel. I really like doing this stuff. See you next time. Thank you again. Cheers.